But I know, Roger, we often looked at the impacts of sustainability, especially certifications and the different levels of certifications for clients, based on the standard benchmark of non-green certification or non-certified buildings. There was also always a cost to that. But I remember you telling me one time, if it's not managed, if certification process isn't managed, the cost can be, it can be anything, right?
It's a very interesting question. So I'll start off by saying, under normal circumstances, I'll preface this as, so this subject of what does, say, green building certification cost you is actually something that's very well analysed the world over, because aside from international green building certification like LEED or DGNB, there's a lot of countries that have their own system. So if you look at Japan, if you look at Singapore, if you look at Australia, they are national systems, and they've all been analysed by the universities. And the interesting thing was that they kind of agreed on what the cost was for green building certification across the sort of bronze, silver, gold, platinum sort of standards. And there was like a kind of the lowest level, if you're using, if you're in a good environment with good products and good professionals to help you to achieve the minimum, could be something like 0 to like 2%, then the next level 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and the highest level maybe like 8 to 12. That's where I say that's under normal operating circumstances, because one of the things that's been more interesting in recent times is seeing what has happened to material prices since COVID. So, for example, we saw timber and we saw metal prices doubling, and in some cases almost tripling. And this is one thing that I find particularly, it kind of scares or piques some people's interest when you talk about the possibility of this carbon crunch that could be coming up. Because in terms of slightly scary numbers, we have a carbon budget that we are supposed to stay under up to 2030, which it doesn't look like we're going to achieve. Now, that's only 7 years away. Most countries have elections every 4 to 5 years, which means most countries will have another national election before we hit 2030. We've been kicking the carbon can down the road for quite a while because we've been through a succession of different crises that have pulled people's attention away from sustainability and issues like this. So one of the things that I've got an eye on that I think is a big risk out there is the possibility that if we hit 1 to 2 years of particularly bad weather, there will suddenly become a very strong political interest for people to start copying like Denmark and really diving in with some teeth, because the people who are currently in power will not want to be seen as the person responsible for not getting to 2030, and the people wanting power want to portray themselves as the person who can get you there. So I see there's a good risk of being a lot of political motivation to suddenly jump very hard and very fast to follow something like Denmark. And the problem with that is that there is a insufficient level of supply to have an England and a France suddenly jump right in trying to do what Denmark's doing. And if you imagine that scenario suddenly just happens, how long does it take you to get manufacturing plants, to get the financing, to get the design, to get it built, to get it up and running? And the final scary number for you on that one, if you say that is 5 years just to get something out the door and started, the final scary number is actually a historical one from Prohibition, of all things, in the United States, where they used to have the alcohol trade there and then they blocked it out. That's an existing trade that everybody knew that was coming back. It took, in different parts of the country, anything from 5 to 15 years for it to get back to where it was. And that was a pre-existing industry. So as you hit this 2030 and beyond, there is the risk and possibility that the cost of decarbonizing your buildings could become particularly expensive if you get particularly if you get a number of things kind of going wrong at the same time, like if you're awake during your economics classes, if you remember them talking about Kondratiev cycles and things like that. So if you just get this crisis happening on its own, but if another one comes along, like cost of living, then you get compound, like with the Kondratiev cycle. So there are risks that the cost of going green could be very, very high if things don't go well.
So what we're actually saying is that right now, even if you think it is expensive, it's not expensive, because it's going to become more expensive if this perfect storm comes for all the developers, investors out there. But Archie, from your perspective, with your conversations at the moment in relation to the development of sustainability in Ireland, is it something that people still consider as a nice to have rather than a need because they view it as expensive?
I think because some of them are looking at sustainability now through the lens of risk. It's almost a corollary of that. It's can we afford not to do it? And I mean, before you talk about, well, LEED has a green premium. If we go for a LEED Platinum building, we're going to have a better return on this. We're going to attract tenants that can afford to pay higher rents. At the moment, the fear is that you have an asset that, won't be able to keep up with its market peers or won't be able to keep up with market expectations. So at the moment, if you have a new building, it's an A-rated asset and it's in the top 5% of its asset class. But if the measurement system changes and they start to say, well, we need to measure carbon, all of a sudden the rules change, and that building that you thought was sustainable could be at risk of what we call stranding. So it's no longer, within the appropriate energy or carbon classification for buildings that are looking to attract green finance or avoid carbon taxes. But it's a rapidly shifting space. There's lots of conflicting legislation, some of it with very difficult acronyms. You've SFDR and ERS, and you're just trying to maintain value in an asset. You're not trying to be the best in class. You're just trying to make sure that at the end of an investment cycle, that building can maintain its value. And I suppose in order to do that, it needs not just to be designed and delivered as a low energy building, but it needs to be operated as a low energy building. And it's difficult to do that because you need maintenance managers, you need planned preventative maintenance platforms. You need to understand, when is the replacement cycle for your refrigerant gases? How do you repair certain systems? How do you operate the BMS? Simple questions like that. Or the fundamental one that's been discussed at the moment is, how do you actually exchange data with your tenants or your customers? I suppose the question at the moment is, what is the cost of not doing it? And what we're seeing is, there are more innovative systems coming to the market, and some of them can be quite simple. Things like wireless energy monitoring software or air quality monitoring systems, and they can be quite insightful, because what we found over the last few years with monitoring buildings for air quality is that it's almost more important than the energy monitoring, because it tells the landlord, well, which spaces are being operated. Are they being over-ventilated or under-ventilated? And the whole pattern of how we use offices, the whole pattern of how we use, educational university buildings has changed profoundly.